some of the things I've done wrong, and hopefully I can help you understand the lessons that I've learned in building good teams. So the first, we're going to use 10 points here, and then I'll kind of comment on each point and what I mean by that. And hopefully you can take a few little excerpts from this and help you and your staff along the way. So number 1 point is mutual respect between coaches, leaders, and the balance of the players. One of the things that I've learned over time in communicating and working with teams is that there needs to be a smooth transition between the coaches, the leaders, and the balance of the players. And in this day and age, where instant feedback is really, really important, it's important that every coach and every assistant coach understands your role and understands that the seamless transporting of information is effective. And what I mean by that is that the smoother you can make the communication between the head coach down on the balance of the players makes your team run a lot smoother. So for instance, one of the things that I learned over time is that as a head coach, you can't do it all. Expecting to communicate with every player on a daily basis is hard, difficult, and at times challenging. And one of the things that I learned over time is that you got to split the responsibilities. So some of the things that we did when I was the head coach was, for instance, we lined up, every player had a responsibility to a certain coach. So what we did there in understanding that is that we tried to make it as easy as we could for the players. So we lined up every player with a coach, and then that assistant coach was responsible for communicating back to the head coach on what he touched that player with on a daily basis. So we tried to use a communication skill called touch them all, and that was every day, every coach had a responsibility on his certain group of players. My job was, and I've always used this term, my job was that I taught everybody, but I coached the leaders. So my responsibility fell on the 4 or 5 leaders on the hockey club, and the assistant coaches picked up the tasks on the balance of the players. That way the communication was seamless, and the players felt like they were getting attended to on a daily basis. One of the things that I learned over time with the assistant coaches was the communication back to me was really important from an assistant coach's standpoint, in that they would keep me up to date on what they were talking about. So on a daily basis, the coaches either emailed me or put a note on my desk on who they talked to and what they said to that player, so that the lines of communication were consistent and we were saying the same thing to every player. And that mutual respect between coaches and the leaders and the balance of the players became much more seamless as time went on. We live in a time right now where instant feedback is needed and really embraced by coaches, players, everybody. And being able to be as seamless as you can with understanding that everybody has a role and that the head coach can't do everything allows your team to run very, very smoothly. Lindsay, the second point. Building an identity. Building an identity has to be work-based, not skill-based. And the reason for that is that as you get going and as your season gets going, as it starts to move along and you get into playoffs or you get into critical games, your identity carries you when the games are tight. And there's a lot of times, and we've all coached in playoff games or important games, there's a lot of times where the game is tied, you're up a goal, you're down a goal, and you've got to play extended minutes. And building an identity on your hockey club that is work-based is really, really important, because that's going to carry you through long stretches where you're comfortable playing, where the game is close, and you're not the first team in coaching terms, you're not the first team that cracks. You're the team that holds things together, and then you force the other team to make big errors at the right time for you. One of the things that I learned over time in building an identity is buzzwords. Buzzwords help you keep your identity. So whether it's the term like second quick or outnumbering people on the puck or whatever, the buzzwords are the area of the game that you can fall back on with video, with quick identification of areas that you can adjust during periods or post game. But building that identity that's work-based is really, really important. The National Hockey League is a second and third effort league. in order to be successful in the National Hockey League, it doesn't matter what your skill sets are. If you have second and third effort on your team, you're going to be competitive every night. And that building identity off of that is really, really important. So understand that every team has a different skill set, but the teams that are successful and the teams that can win the close games and the teams that can be championship teams are the ones that build it from a work base. Lindsay, third point. System of play designed for the team. And what I mean by that is that when you come in and coach a hockey club, your assessment of your personnel is important, but also your assessment on what they can do is more important. And what I mean by that is that you can't put a system in place that your team can't fit in. And what I mean by that is that you have to look at what your overall team design looks like and then build your system from that. One of the worst mistakes I made was forcing a system into a team that wasn't designed that way. So for instance, my first couple of years in Dallas, I came from junior hockey, and we had the Edmonton Oilers system at that time, which was 2-1-2 full court press. And we had, and a lot of times in junior, we had the successful play that way because we had mobile defensemen that could activate. Dallas, in the team in Dallas, we didn't have that. And we had to become more of a counterattack team. And one of the mistakes I made early on as a coach is I tried to force that 2-1-2 system on the Stars, and we didn't have the foot speed or the back end foot speed to play that way. And it didn't help us win hockey games. As a matter of fact, it hurt us. So designing your system based on your personnel is really important. If you have a team that has defensemen that are really good pinching and activation and can read the play properly, you can use them in the forecheck. But understand that when you design this, you have to have an overall plan of what is going to allow your team based that season on success. And you might have to make adjustments. You see it in the National Hockey League now. There are certain teams that play, and you especially see it in the neutral zone. Well, there are teams that play a certain way in the neutral zone based on personnel. The team that Barry Trotz won in Washington, he thought that his hockey club could be more effective using right wing lock, and they went to that design rather than 1-2-2. And that type of design play was made specific for his hockey club so that he could have success. And that's really important. So how you think your team resonates, how you think your team looks personnel wise, that's your system of play that you can design from that. And there's a number of opportunities. There's a lot of different systems out there. There's different forechecking systems that are in place, and they get changed on a yearly basis. So understanding, especially in minor hockey, if you feel like your team looks like somebody in the NHL, studying that system of play that can allow you to have success is really, really important. Point 4, Lindsay. Effective use of the whole coaching staff. As a head coach, you can't do it all, and you shouldn't be doing it all. If you want to be an effective staff and you want to be an effective coaching staff in whole, you have to include everyone. And that is that you've got to have shared responsibility. And it's not just, it's understanding that you have to turn your coaches loose. In other words, if you're going to have a coach look after penalty killing, you're going to have a coach look after power play, you have to promote his effectiveness in working with the staff. So in other words, or working with players, understanding that an assistant coach that is responsible for the power play, he also should run that part of the practice. Nothing more confuses the players than when a coach is responsible for one end of the special teams and then is not allowed to run that part of the practice. You can control the intensity of your special teams work or the work part of that, but the design and the running of the drills and the effectiveness of that should fall on your whole coaching staff. And one of the reasons for that is that shows respect for your assistant coaches. And I've found a lot of times that successful teams are when the head coach has responsibility for the guts of the practice. In other words, the team play, the 5-on-5, the equal man opportunities. And then when it becomes, whether it's penalty killing or power play, the coach that is responsible for that, he's able to take over, and that shows trust and respect for that coach. So effective use of your whole coaching staff in that specific area is really important. But it's not just effective use, it's effective use in letting them run the practices, letting them run the video sessions, and letting them work with the personnel. Point 5, Lindsay. Daily communication on team play. So understanding that the head coach's job is to keep the train on the tracks. And the successful head coaches in the National Hockey League, the ones that you can see operating today and in the past, when you see that coach's record, one of the success ratios of the really good programs have a head coach that's in daily communication on the team play, but more important, he keeps the team out of the ditch. Your highs and lows, if they're in a very level, in a key level field, you're going to understand that that team is going to be consistent in their team play. So understanding daily communication on team play, and again, I use the word buzzwords again on that. You can take videos and incorporate them into your buzzwords so that your team can recover quickly. The daily communication you have on team play is really, really important. And I use the term touch them every day with it. And that means that when you're working with your team on that team play, that the daily communication, even if it's one drill or a little bit of this, if you touch it every day, your team is going to become very, very consistent in their team play. One of the things that happens, especially in the National Hockey League, when we can't practice because of travel or the schedule or whatever goes on, you'll see coaches do that even in pregame skates. You'll see coaches even for 30 seconds run a 5-on-5 drill. Or you'll see a little bit of down low stuff, even in pregame skates. And that's what's changed, is that being able to touch that team play, the 5-on-5 play on a daily basis, and not being afraid to do it because you're worried about whether you're going to wear the players out. If you just touch it, those are the daily reminders that allow teams to be consistent on a week-to-week basis. Point 6, Lindsay, sorry. Post-game review. For me, post-game review is more important than pre-game preparation. When you look at pre-game preparation, you're saying, if you look at it after 1 month in the season, you're saying the same thing about the same or different opposition on a daily basis. But the post-game review, for me, the coaches that do that in detail are the coaches that have a lot of success at our level. And what I mean by that is that the post-game review and the details, going back and reviewing buzzwords, going back and reviewing what you did the night before, is more important than the pregame preparation. We end up saying the same 5 or 6 points on a daily basis when we're getting our team ready to play. But in the post-game review, when the emotion is gone from the game and you're back in the rink the next day, is really, really important in being a consistent performing hockey club. It allows you as a coach to do review. It allows you to keep your team play intact, and it allows you to make sure that you don't forget the details. The post-game review is the details that allow good coaches to be successful. So not being afraid to, and it's uncomfortable at times, but understanding that review and accepted in the right way by your players and sold in the right way by you allows your team to be a consistent performing hockey club. To me, winning programs in the National Hockey League are the ones where you're not afraid to confront the team play the next day when the emotion is out of the game. Point 7, Lindsay. Weekly communication with the leadership group. And I said this before at the start of the presentation. Weekly communicate. I always use the term, I taught everybody, I coached everybody, but I worked exclusively with the leadership group. Someone in the room has to sell it when you're not there. As coaches, we're not in the room very much. We make a presentation, we leave the room. But what gets said in that room after you leave is the most important subject that matters. And understanding that by being able to have weekly communication with your leadership group, by being able to keep them informed, by making sure that they know what you're thinking and you know what they're thinking, allows you to have seamless transition when you're out of the room. And what's said after you leave that room is the most important part of coaching. Understanding that when you leave, that the message that you're giving is being accepted and embraced by your team. And it's hard to have 20 players understand what you're saying. So working with your leadership group and getting them to embrace that responsibility of communicating your message back to the team becomes really important. And that means that the weekly communication, to me, is you listening as much as you're talking, and understanding that it goes both ways. So when you open up with your communication with your leadership group, you've got to make sure that you're listening to what they're saying. And it's hard to do that because we all know when we ask questions, nobody puts their hand up until you start asking them to put their hand up. But if you can open that door on a weekly basis, you're going to get the message in the locker room when you're not there to be much better and much more consistent. And even at that time, they become the communicators. And I've always, one of the things I learned from Bob Gainey and Bob Clark was that at some period of time, you have to turn the room over to the players. And one of the things that the coaches that they played for said that they did a great job of was the coaches had control at the start of the year. And then as the season went on, the players had complete control at the end of the year. And that's what your goal should be. How quickly can I turn this over to the players so the message that they're giving each other is the same message that I want received by the leadership group? It becomes too vague when you do it to the whole group. Doing it to the smaller group or the people that you trust in that leadership package allows you to have a better seamless transition of information back in the locker room. Point 8, Lindsay? Taking the temperature of the team. One of the things that's really difficult in coaching is that you have to coach sometimes when you're in an area of conflict. And that is that every day isn't going to be perfect. Every day isn't going to be smooth. They're going to be mad at you. You're going to be mad at them at times. But understanding that taking the temperature of the team is really important. So when you're presenting, think about this. When you're presenting video or you're talking to the team, who's watching the team? And one of the things that we did, and I found very successful over time, is we used one of the assistant coaches to watch the players to see if they were watching us and picking up the information. So the temperature of the room and when you're presenting, are they watching? Are they listening? Is it striking a chord? Is it hitting home? And you can't do that as you're presenting because part of the time you're looking at the video, part of the time you're looking at the board, but who's watching them? And we found it a lot better when one of the coaches took the temperature of the room by watching to see if they were listening or to see if they were communicating. The other thing is that you can really use your assistant coaches in a really positive manner by understanding that they do the walkabouts. And what I mean by that is that going into the other areas with your assistant coaches, they do the walkabouts. They can gauge the temperature a lot better than you. You're not going to be able to get that feel because the players are going to be a little bit leery or wary when you're in the area. But having your assistant coaches being able to take the temperature and then listening to that, they might be able to go in the room and say, Coach, there's no energy in the room. If we're going to practice, it's going to have to be short. Understanding before you go on the ice to practice or prepare for a game, where is their level of energy to be listeners, and understanding that the temperature of the room, you can really work with your assistant coaches to help you on that, but you're not going to be able to do that yourself because you're busy presenting. Use them as much as you can. Point 9. Thanks, Lindsay. The balance between work, rest, and fun. And it's interesting because the teams that do this well at the National Hockey League level really are successful over the long term. And one of the things, the balance between work, rest, and fun, you're asking your players to embrace sacrifice. You're asking your players to embrace things that make them really, really uncomfortable. You're the person that can take them into places they can't get to themselves. And that's a very difficult job. but you have to also understand the balance between work, rest, and fun. And also what is fun for the players. And one of the things that we work with the hockey players, they're highly competitive people, highly competitive athletes, and they have fun in competitive atmospheres. But they have to see that you're enjoying putting something like that together. So when you watch teams over time, watching their practices, coaches put that balance every day between work, rest, and fun. And what I mean by that is that there's a time to put the work boots on, but the last feeling they have at practice has to be fun. And what I mean by that is that whatever you do, whatever you leave them with, you have to leave them in a good way. And they can't view work as punishment, and understanding that up front, no matter what happened the day before, you can have a work day, but you still have to, you can even disguise the fun part of it with a really competitive drill, but it has to be there at the end. So they leave the practice, so they get ready to play the next game full of energy. And there's a lot of times you go through games that are tough losses, that are emotional. You've lost a game in the last minute of play, or something has happened. You've had a penalty in the last 2 minutes and got scored on, whatever. But the next day, the feeling they leave with when they leave there, they got to leave with that hopeful feeling. And you can still get the work in, you can get the fun in. And when it's time to rest, understand this, that sometimes the rest is just being away from you. Because again, as a head coach, we're asking our players to do things that are really uncomfortable. And when you become a little bit of the taskmaster at asking them to do that, sometimes getting a break from you is a good thing. And that's where the communication and getting the temperature from your other coaches is really important, because they will allow you to get the balance that sometimes just physical separation from the head coach is important. You're the key cog in keeping this thing together. And sometimes when a break from you can allow them to have fun. Point 10, Lindsay, embracing sacrifice. One of the coaches that I worked with in the Olympics, whenever he finished a video presentation, I was really impressed by this. Whenever he finished a video presentation, the last 6 clips he showed were of nothing but sacrifice. Whether it was blocking shots, whether it was the second or third effort, whether it was winning puck battles on the boards. We had the technical clips, but he always finished the clip with embracing sacrifice. And understand, and go back and said this at the start of the presentation, that coaching is asking people to do really difficult things in hockey. Things that are, like I said, make people really uncomfortable. Anytime you can embrace that, that's important. And the presentation, or you're pointing that out either on the bench, or you're pointing that out in the locker room, or at practice, or on video. Anytime you can embrace that, that's something that's a badge of honor for the players, and that's something that a lot of successful teams do. And I think it's really important that those are the differences between championship teams and teams that can't get there. And when you see that outlined by a head coach, it's amazing how good a player feels about that. When he pops up on that video and he's the guy blocking the shot, or he's the guy that comes up with a loose puck out of a scrum, or he's the guy that wins the net front battle, when he sees that, he's going to go the extra mile for his teammates. Remember in hockey, before I open this up, remember in hockey that the NHL is a second and third effort league. And the teams that embrace the second and third effort and really, really take pride in that are the teams that are successful. We're a very competitive league. There's a lot of competitive teams, but that little edge really comes out when you see it being embraced by teams. And you can feel it. When you're watching games, you can see the teams that do that. You can see the teams that make those sacrifices. And you know that that's a team that's going to be a very, very tough out. To me, the communication and leadership in building a team as a head coach You have to be the guy that's the first to ask for help. You have to be the guy that's willing to put himself out there and be vulnerable. And what I mean by that is that in order to be a good team, the coaches or the players have to see you in human qualities. And that is that if you've made a mistake and you bring it out and you put it out front for the players, they're going to respect you even more. And if you ask for help, you're going to get even more respect. To me, winning, and that's what we coach for. We coach to win. Winning to me is understanding that if I build the team, I can win on a long-term basis. And the teams that are successful in the National Hockey Leagues are teams that are built from sacrifice, from second and third effort, and commitment to each other. And those lines of communication have to be open on a daily basis, and that means a shared responsibility. Include everybody in making sure that you can get the help that you need, or that you can help the players, and don't try to do it all by yourself. And the players see that. When they see a shared coaching staff, when they see a and honors each other, respect, and they'll even go further for you. Thanks very much. Lindsay, you can open it up to any questions if you don't mind.
All right, Ken, thank you so much. That was terrific. There's been a ton of questions that have come in right now. Just going to flip quickly to the next slide. Just as a reminder, guys, you can use that Q&A box at the bottom to submit your questions. You can do so anonymously, and we can try to get through as many as we can right now. We would also love your feedback. And so I've just included the URL there for how you can submit your feedback on today's webinar. I'm just going to end sharing of my screen, and we'll open it now up to some questions. So the first one is, what is the biggest difference from your time in Dallas to your time in Edmonton from the perspective of dealing with players?
For me, the dealing with players is the instant feedback and understanding that the players want the information immediately, and you have to be prepared to give them that. And that's just not the videos that are on the benches now, the iPads. It's they want to know where they stand on a daily basis, and you've got to be really sensitive to that. You've got to, and that's where you got to really use everybody. And over time, the term I used was touch them all. So I would make sure that our staff went out of their way to touch the players on a daily basis. And it was amazing things that you didn't even think about as a coach that would bother the players or that was troubling, and being able to keep that door open all the time. And you can't do it as a head coach by yourself. You've got to be able to use everybody. And when we started to use everybody, it became very, very effective. The players always want to know where they stand.
Okay. In establishing your culture, how much did you leverage your leadership group? You touched on that a bit, so maybe just elaborate a bit further. And what were some things you did with those groups that you thought had an impact, either positive or negatively?
Well, for me, just starting on the negative, the one thing I learned over time was that you can have too much structure in team building. And what I mean by that is that we used to plan a lot of activities, and it had a small impact, but really what had a big impact was the players just getting together. And so over time, I learned that team building becomes just allowing the players to come together. And we would bring in presenters all the time, and actually at times we thought we were really doing good with it, but the players effectively just told me, listen, we just want to go out and have a few beers together, or we want to go and have a dinner together, or we just want to we want to hang out together. And I found the more times we made that opportunity, the better it became. And over time, that they just want it to be unstructured. They want to be left to their own devices and have as much fun as they can with themselves. And so I found over time we kind of calmed the structure down. Whether we brought in Navy SEALs or leadership people, we kind of calmed that down. And I found the other thing that really worked from a cultural standpoint was that your culture has to be work based. And what I mean by that is that if it's work-based, you're going to be playing extended minutes where the game is really close, and you're going to trust yourself, and you're going to trust. And there's always the term trust your work and let your skill take over. And I think that's more important than anything, because right now in the National Hockey League, there's 10 teams that could win the Stanley Cup every year. And the teams that are work-based are the teams that usually have a lot of success.
Okay, some continuation of the theme that you've been talking about. You've coached a lot of different teams over the years. If you don't have a great leadership group, how do you turn things around and build better relationships so that you can sell your message to the team?
To me, not having a good leadership group doesn't cut it. Your job as a coach is to really work with the leaders, and that means that you might have to amp up the communication. Instead of weekly or bi-monthly, it might end up being every 3 or 4 days. But you've got to build. You can't go anywhere in the league, and you can't have success unless you have strong leadership group. Your leadership group directs the traffic on a daily basis, whether it's in the locker room, on the bus, on the plane, at meals, or wherever. So strengthening your leadership, that's your job as a coach. And to me, that's as important as designing the system of play, because they provide the emotional and competitive direction that has to be followed by the players. So it's your job to work with it. It's your job to brace it up and empower them. And I think that if you feel like it's not strong, then it's your job to strengthen it.
Have you ever had to change your leadership group during the season because they felt they weren't supporting you? And then a second question on that theme, does the player need to have a letter on their jersey to be part of your leadership group?
First of all, on the letter side, no. One of the things I learned over time was that sometimes when you got too many players in the leadership group, it gets too vague. Sometimes when you got 6 or 7 players, the message becomes too vague. So I've at times I've shrunk the group, and I found that some of the veteran players that don't carry letters, it works better one-on-one with them. So they can be part of the group, but they don't come into the group structure, because sometimes a veteran player can really intimidate a younger group of leaders. And so sometimes I've split the group, and I've said 2 or 3 veteran guys that I've worked with. For example, when I was in Dallas, we had Guy Carbonneau. Guy was a strong personality, a terrific leader, but when he was in the group setting, he dominated it. And so nobody else spoke up because there was so much respect for Guy. So I met Guy one-on-one, and then the rest of the group was able to build some dynamic, because the 4 other guys that were with Guy were much younger players. And I think you got to make sure that when you're working with your leadership group, that they all have a voice, not just your captain or not just one guy. And if one guy's dominating it too much, you might have to bring him out and work with him individually rather than put him in the group, because then the group starts directing all of their information through him, and they don't get a say in what your team wants to do.
Okay. What are a few of the qualities that you personally value most when picking your leadership group?
First of all, for me, is which players have a pulse of the team. And again, the pulse for me is work-based, not skill-based. That's where you get into problems, is when you have leaders who don't have a clear understanding about the emotional connection that you need in order to be successful. So to me, do they have a feeling of the work-based area of your team that has to be, important for you to win and have success? And number 2 for me, when you're picking your leaders, you also have to pick people that are willing to confront you as the head coach. Because I said this before, dealing when there's confrontation is really important, because conflict and the areas where they're not happy with you, you're not happy with them at times, they have to be worked through, because you can really grow as a team from there. So don't be afraid to bring in people that are confrontational towards you, and they're willing to speak up, because it's going to make you a better coach.
Okay. Moving on to some more of the communication side of it, were your meetings formal, the ones that you held on a weekly basis, or how much structure would you have in those meetings?
You know what I learned over time was that um, I pre-warned them, rather than just bring them in and sit with them. One of the things I did was I put the questions out before. So the night before, I would text them and say, these are the 4 things I want you to think about. These are the 4 things I want to talk about tomorrow. And I would send those to the leaders, and then so they were ready for it. Players don't like surprises, and so one of the things I learned over time was to set the meeting up so that they were ready for it. Was give them time to think about it. So I would send them a text and say, hey, these are the 3 or 4 things that we want to talk about tomorrow. Need your input on it, and then have that kind of out there. And I remember one time I put on the thing, I want to know how I'm doing, and they were loaded. They were ready for me, and so being able to be vulnerable is important. And I think that pre-warning them and letting them know this is what's coming really helped in having some constructive information in those meetings.
Okay. Another question, how are you able to manage players who do not want to buy into the team system and what your coaching staff is saying?
Okay, well, understand the system is work-based. So it's a lot of times it's the stuff that's uncomfortable. And I found over time that in order to get a player to buy in, you have to be prepared as a coach to look at that long term, not short term. And at the same time, I found, and I don't want to say you're tricking them, but understanding that if you have a player that's not buying in immediately, you have to look at it and say, okay, this is going to be 3 or 4 months, or it could be the whole season. But at the same time, I don't want to take away from what his strengths are. And one of the things that I found over time, and this is mistakes I've made, is that when you start harping on what he's not doing and the lack of buy-in, what he does do stops happening also. So to me, I harped and pounded on what he did well, and then I looked at what he didn't do well and what we needed to be done as a gradual process. And I tried to be patient with the overall development of the things that we needed, but I didn't ever want to take away from the things that he did well. So for instance, you have a lot of times your highly skilled players are risk takers. They take chances. And if you harp on the things that they're not doing, then the chances and the opportunities they take advantage of offensively won't be there either. The player will get discouraged very easily. So I tried to build on his strengths and know that working on his weaknesses was going to take time, and be as patient as I could.
How do you hold players accountable with regards to second and third effort hockey and to the system as a whole?
Well, I think that one of the things that really works is being able to set those examples out by embracing. People want to be on those videos. People want to be in that communication of sacrifice. Every player does. And the more I showed sacrifice, the more I showed embracing the hard things, the more I showed it, the more people wanted to be on it. So there are times that you need to meet with a player individually if you're not happy with the second and third effort. You're not happy with his battle level at pucks. You're not happy with some of the things. You can meet on that on an individual basis, and you can put drills in place that embrace that. But nothing more gets a player to buy in than when he sees his teammates getting to see that by video or by communication from you, because that's what players want to do. They want to please the coach. That's what they want to do. And the more times you can show it, the more times you can get your team to embrace it, the more people want to be on that video.
How honest are you with your players on where they stand? And can you ever be too honest?
Um, that's a good question because part of coaching is selling. You're selling ideas, you're selling a system, you're selling a style, and you're selling hope. And one of the things that I tried to tell my players is that I'm demanding, and I was and always will be a demanding coach, but I demanded of the players because I believe in them. And I really believed in my teams. And I believed my teams could do things special. I didn't care what level it was at. I didn't care where it was at. I always believed my teams could do something special. So part of the sales job is, and the honesty becomes, I'm going to be demanding, but I'm demanding because I believe in you. And I found the players accepted that. When you're demanding, or when you're really brutally honest with them, they can view it two ways. They can view it as punishment or criticism, or they can view it as he's pushing me into areas that are uncomfortable, but he's doing it because he believes I can do it. And if you can sell that part of it, if you can get them to buy in because they feel like you believe in them, that's the best way to do it. Then you can be much more honest.
Okay. For players that aren't having fun coming to the rink, they don't have the right mindset that it's an opportunity every day to get better. How do you help those players show up with the right perspective?
Well, I think the first question you have to ask is, what responsibility do you play in them not having fun? Like, as a coach, what's on me and what's on the player? And then you have to be able to ask the question is, what do you need to do to, like, the fun is in the work. And to me, that's what you have to convince that player of. The fun is in the work. And we work hard because it's fun. And that's the respect. To me, the hard work and determination you put in is the respect you show for your teammates. That's what you're trying to get, is the players to respect each other by how hard they play for each other. And you have to ask yourself, what responsibility am I playing in this player not having fun? Because you can't have fun and then decide to work. That's Pollyanna way of looking at things. The work has to be there, and then the fun has to be in the work. And where is it not getting through to the player? Because a lot of times when the players are coming to the rink and they're not having fun, it's because they feel like either practice or the way you're treating them is punishment. You got to get through that dialogue. And if you can get through that dialogue, at the end, the core value of hard work makes it fun is really important, because there's no team that can be successful that doesn't embrace that. And you can see it in the National Hockey League. You can see which teams are having fun because of the effort that they put in and the effort and sacrifice. And if a player doesn't have that, then you got to figure out between him and you and the communication is what's preventing him from doing that.
Okay. You talked about delegating responsibility within your coaching staff. A lot of the coaches listening today, though, don't have 6 or 7 coaches like in the NHL. They have 2, maybe 3. So the question is, what are your suggestions for a smaller coaching staff that aren't able to delegate out as much responsibility to a bigger group?
Well, understanding if you've got 2 assistant coaches or you've got 1 assistant coach, that's enough. You don't need to have a big man staff. You don't need to have 4 or 5 on the bench like it is in the NHL at times. Understanding that when you delegate, you delegate. You don't delegate and then look over. And we all think we delegate, but then when the coach is presenting, are we hanging over top of them? So when you delegate, you've got to give them that responsibility, and at times even leave the room. The players know when coaches don't trust each other. And it's really important that if you're going to trust your coaching staff, then you've got to give them that responsibility, delegate it, and then you've got to move on to something else. You can more than manage what's needed in the hockey club, but you've got to make sure that you got to turn your coaches loose. So you've got to trust that they have the right information from you, and they can make the right presentations, and then you got to let them do it. And it's really important that you're not looking over their shoulders, that you're allowing them to present. Your focus is on the identity of the team, and their focus is on a lot of times technical issues, not on effort issues. That's your responsibility. You're the last line of that defense. And to me, when you do that, you're showing the respect for that coach. But there's too many coaches for me right now that they have a coaching staff they allow that coach to present, and then they override them on information after that. You can't do that if you want to have a successful staff.
How did you manage your leadership group, for example, when you were with Team Canada, when you had that many skilled guys on the team?
It was really interesting because I coached in 4 Olympics, and in 3 of the Olympics, the players took over after 3 days, and I we started out. For instance, we started out with a certain idea who was going to be responsible for the leadership, and then it turned out every time to be different, because when you've got all these great athletes together, you never knew how the dynamic would change. So we read it after a couple of games, and then the dynamic changed on every situation. And what was really important for us was that we put key people in charge of communicating the information that we put forward. So for instance, we would put charts up. This is the system, this is the team play. And then we watched to see who looked at those charts, who brought people over to those charts and took kind of the control of the locker room. And in each case, it changed. I remember in the 2002 Olympics, when we struggled early, we had 4 players come up to us and said to us, they came up as a group, and they said, you just tell us what to do and we're going to get this thing done. Well, 3 of them weren't in the package that we put together at the start of the leadership. When we looked at it, they were 3 different players, and we just allowed those guys to take control. So to me, we let it play out, and then when we saw who was doing it, we let those guys take control.
Okay. Still a lot of questions coming in about how you would select your captain. So maybe you can just elaborate a bit further on that one.
Well, I wanted my captain to be the guy that challenged me. I wanted my captain to be the guy that was willing to challenge me as a head coach. So I didn't want somebody that was just a yes man. I wanted somebody who I knew could challenge me to be a better coach. And I wanted somebody that I knew I could empower and trust in getting the information back to the players on a daily basis that was needed. I needed someone who wasn't afraid to speak up, who wasn't afraid to confront me if I wasn't doing the job, and who wasn't afraid to say the things that needed to get said in the locker room. So I looked for somebody that was direct with the players and direct with myself as a coach, because to me, the line of communication from the head coach to the leader or to the captain back into the team is important, but it's the line back towards you that's more important. In other words, I needed someone to tell me if I was doing a good or poor job. So I always looked for someone I knew who wasn't afraid to confront me.
Okay. How do you handle star players as opposed to role players, and was it different or consistent?
Well, for me, everybody says they handle the players the same. That's not true. The star players, understanding that with the puck, there was negotiation, a lot of negotiation. Without the puck, there was no negotiation. And I tried to get the players to embrace that feeling right from the start of the season on. And what I mean by that is that you don't have the same series of lights, green light, red light, yellow light, with every player, because there's certain players that can do certain things with the puck and certain players that can't. So what I tried to tell the players was, there's going to be different lines of negotiation depending on how we see you as a player, but there's no degree of negotiation when we're checking. When we're checking, everybody's on the same page. And so there was a lot of freedom that I gave top players. And the other thing was, to be honest with you, I learned over time, was one of the things I learned a very valuable lesson on, was that sometimes what a player does with the puck and the risk he plays with it bothers you as a coach. But if it doesn't bother the team, then it shouldn't bother you that much. And that's a hard thing to comprehend as a coach. But I remember people communicating to me saying, "Hey, listen, what he does doesn't bother us, so it shouldn't bother you that much." And so I cut deals. And the deal was that with the puck, there's going to be some more freedom because of the exceptional things people can do. But without the puck, everybody's on the same page.
How do you keep your top guys accountable without losing them and while still showing everyone else that they are all held to the same standard?
Your top players have to understand that you're pushing them because you believe in them and that you want great things for them. They can't view it as punishment. They can't view it as just being stereotyped. Your top players are your difference makers, but they have to understand that you're pushing them into areas because you believe in them and you believe that the team can follow them to success. And getting them to understand that is more important than anything. They can't view falling in line as punishment. They got to view it as he believes in things I can do. He thinks I can do exceptional tasks, and that's why he's pushing me in this direction.
Okay. We're almost at the top of the hour, so I'll just ask a couple last questions. How do you manage outside variables like agents, parents, owners who have maybe questioned or tried to change your culture and influence your leaders? And how do you deal with those influences?
That's the day and age we live in right now. And to me, rather than get angry with it, you gotta embrace it. And players have a lot of individuals that work with them, and a lot of them are very good at what they do. And if you're offended by that, then you're going to create friction with you and the player that sometimes is never repairable. And to me, those are the questions that you need to ask, because a player comes in and he's got a lot of people in his ear. Uh, Parents, agents, strength conditioning coaches, skating coaches, nutritionists. Players have a lot of people that work with them. There's not very often that it's just you and the player. And understanding that you're willing to accept and embrace the individual help that that player is getting is really, really important, because it can anger you, and the player is going to read that discomfort, and it's not going to be a comfortable setting for you. So it's the new world we coach in, and you've got to find a way to embrace it. Because I look at it now, at the start I was a little bit offended by it, but I look at it now as this is a chance for me to learn also. There's new ideas out there. It's a chance for me to learn, but being able to listen, because you might be selling something and the player's not buying it, and he's not buying it because someone else he trusts is giving him different information. So being able to have that dialogue and understanding that there's a lot of pressure on that player and there's a lot of people in his ear is really important. And you've got to be a good listener in that area, because I think at times if we embrace it, it's going to make us better coaches.
Okay. This one relates to minor hockey. What can a technical director do, in your opinion, to best develop coaches? And what is the biggest focus or takeaway to stress in developing coaches at that minor level?
Well, I think two things. First of all, good coaches run great practices. Good coaches run practices with a lot of interaction, not a lot of stoppage, a lot of flow to it. What I mean by flow is it's drill after drill after drill. Good coaches have practices that look like almost game-like situations in their own way. So their teaching is done before, and their hour on the ice is very, very effective. So to me, having coaches run great practices is going to allow your players to get better quickly. And then having a real, to me, strong set of guidelines on how the coach acts during the game. How does he present when he goes into the locker room? How does he present between periods? How does he present post game? How does he act on the bench? Those are guidelines and principles that have to be adhered to. So to me, the technical director is responsible for how does the coach run his practice? How effective does he run his practice? And there's core values that have to be in there. Has he got people over the whiteboard all the time? Is he got 6 or 7 presentations in 1 hour in a whiteboard? There's no flow to the practice. The players aren't having fun because it's stop, go, stop, go. And how does he act on the bench? And I think that's the technical director's responsibility to make sure that the coaches act and behave during the competition in a proper manner.
Okay. Last question. We'll end it on a lighter note. Someone has read that you're a big fan of military history. Do you have a few favorite books that you'd recommend to help coaches develop?
The best book I've ever read on military history is a book called April 1865. I'm not sure if Trump's done it, but all the other presidents have read the book, and the last 6 presidents or 5 presidents. It's a terrific book on understanding what happened during the Civil War. And to me, it talks about Reconstruction. It talks about the last really month of the Civil War. And then the last one for me, because it puts you in that person, is Killer Angels. Killer Angels was a book written a number of years ago. It's about the Battle of Gettysburg, and those 2 books to me are terrific because one gives you a feeling of what took place April 1865 on Reconstruction and the building of the United States back again. And Killer Angels, when you read the book, you feel like you're one of the soldiers in the battle, and it's very riveting.
Okay. Ken, thank you so much for your time today. We're all very appreciative. There are a lot of questions that we unfortunately didn't have the time to get to, but we have a copy of them, and we'll try to get back to you in the next kind of few days with an answer. And with that, stay healthy and safe, wash your hands. And again, thank you, Ken, and for everyone joining us today.
All right. Thanks a lot, Lindsay. All the best, everyone.
Take care. Bye.